Hey, Amy.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, it's 12 o'clock and I've started the broadcast and we'll just wait just a minute to make sure everybody's able to log on,
Okay.
have access. And I can hear you pretty clearly and I can see your screen. So
Nice.
it's be going well.
Seems that way.
Okay, let's go ahead and get started today. Thank you guys for joining us this afternoon for our first Google Hangout on air. Um, we appreciate your time, and hopefully this will be a session that helps you. The idea behind these um, Google Hangouts, it's just going to give us a chance to all come together at the same time to hear about a portion of the content that you've been reading in the course and going a little deeper. An advantage of doing this with the Google Hangout on Air is that you have the opportunity to ask questions or put a comment into a Q&A box, and that way we can address any or make any clarifications that you might need right here on the spot. So I just want to take a minute to point out how you can do that. If you scroll your cursor over your screen, you should have a toolbar that appears on the left side of your screen. It's a row of icons, and in that row of icons, you should see a Q&A box. And if you click on the Q&A box, you'll be able to type in a question, and we'll be able to address that. And so, Kelly Powell, I see you're in here and you're saying hello, and we certainly are glad to have you here. And just if you want to make sure your presence is known, please feel free to type in a comment while Amy Miller talks to us about SAM today. I'll be looking at our Q&A box to see what's going on with you guys. So having said that, I do want to introduce Amy Miller so she can get started. And thank you very much, Amy, for talking to us today about the self-assessment instrument of MTSS implementation. So I'm going to give it over to you. And as I said, I'll be looking at the Q&A box for any questions that are popping up. Sound good?
Sounds great. And just to mention also that if you have colleagues that couldn't make the live broadcast right now at 12, this will be recorded and posted, so Angie will send that information out as well. So today we're just going to talk with the cohort 2 teams. Hopefully you have a good group there about the SAM, the self-assessment of MTSS implementation. We're going to talk a little bit how this is going to be structured. We're going to talk about what it is, why we've adopted it, what's it measuring, how is it validated, and how is it intended to be used. And then we'll open up the PDF document that was sent to you and also posted within the Moodle to show you kind of a walk around of what the items actually look like. And then we'll open up as well how the electronic scoring, just give you a very short tutorial on the electronic scoring component of that, because that's how it's intended to be administered as a fidelity measure. So we'll do that and take questions along the way. So first, when we talk about SAM, what is it? SAM is the self-assessment of MTSS implementation. It's now in its 2nd edition, and it measures school-level implementation of a multi-tiered system of support. So it's an important distinction to note that this is administered and used as a guide at the school level. So most of our folks on our MTSS teams are district-level personnel, and they're supporting their schools with implementation of a multi-tiered system of support. And this tool actually allows you to go out to your schools, help guide them through implementation, and then also assess what areas of need they may have within their implementation structures. The SAM contains 39 items, and it's across 6 domains. The purpose of the administration of the SAM is to help school-level and district-level personnel to identify and then prioritize their implementation steps. We'll give you some more information. We're going to give you some more graphics and things like that also during our coordinators meeting, but it's also important to talk about what it is not. And what it is not intended to be is an accountability measure for schools or an evaluative component for schools. It's really supposed to assist us to assist you, and then also assess district personnel to assist schools with implementation. Okay, so it's got 39 items across 6 domains. We'll go through those domains in just a sec. The 6 domains do correspond with our 6 critical components of MTSS, so they should look familiar to you. Here's our 6 critical components, and when you see the SAM, if you've got that PDF downloaded already, we'll also open that up in just a second, you'll see these very familiar 6 critical components of MTSS is how the SAM is structured. So why are we doing this? Why are we measuring implementation fidelity of MTSS? For a long time, we haven't had something that measures the implementation at a school level of our academic support systems that we have in place for schools. And typically in the past, that was called kind of a responsiveness to instruction framework. We didn't have a school level implementation tool for that. For our behavior support systems, if you were using something like PBIS, many times we did have an implementation fidelity tool. But as we're moving towards this multi-tiered system of support, we want to make sure that schools have a tool that will allow them to see, are we on the right path to structuring our school in such a way that we're meeting the needs of all adults and all learners in our building through multiple layers of effective instruction and intervention. So we want to make sure that there's quality implementation of these components going on across schools. And this will give us a way to say, you know, they're doing some really good stuff, but it's not yet MTSS. And then this school has crossed over and said, yes, they are actually implementing a multi-tiered system of support. So it gives us those kind of distinguishing characteristics. And then we'll be able to identify and hopefully spread out implementation across those really good sites to be able to network across the state so we can actually see what level of implementation schools are implementing with. So why did we select the SAM? So there was, during the summer of 2014, there was an extensive literature review that was conducted to determine, did we need to come up with our own MTSS implementation fidelity measure? We knew we needed one of those. Or did we want to adopt a measure that was already existed? From that review of the literature, we found the SAM, and it was originally developed in Florida, but it was undergoing at the time a national pilot. Wake County Public Schools was actually involved in that national pilot study. So we already had some information from that. They had already done the validation, and the critical components really lined up very well with what our idea of an effective multi-tiered system of support was. So since it was already validated, for the most part, it was easy for us to adopt that for our use, although we had to, which we'll talk about in just a second, go through some independent validation to make sure that it was exactly what we wanted for North Carolina. So how did we do this validation? So after we decided that the SAM was probably what we wanted to go with for our implementation fidelity tool, we set up a standard setting project. So during the summer of 2015, we brought together a diverse group of education professionals from across our state, from IHEs, from central office positions in school districts to school level personnel. We brought together people from these different realms that had experience implementing some type of multi-tiered database support system. So they may have been folks that had implemented RTI in the past, PBIS in the past, or a multi-tiered system in the past. We had them go through and review each item on the SAM and talk about whether it was accurate and valid for what we believed about a multi-tiered system of support in North Carolina. After that, we asked that they also, since the SAM was originally developed in Florida as strictly a self-assessment, we felt as though we wanted something that could be used as a self-assessment for schools to identify how they're doing, what next implementation steps they needed to take. But then in addition to that, in order to make sure that we were truly implementing MTSS with fidelity across our schools, we wanted to also allow the SAM to be used in what we call kind of a facilitated administration. And by that facilitated administration, what we mean is a district personnel, the district MTSS coordinator, or another member of the district MTSS team would go out to the school one time per year. We're asking between April and June, which will give you all this information also in print. And facilitate that administration. So the school team would come together to be able to do it on their own first, come to what they think their ratings are, and then we ask this panel, when we set the standards, to also come up with, for every item, what are some possible evidences a district person could look for to support that school team's answer. So that team also came up with evidences that already exist across schools as a suggestion to coordinators that these may be things you can do to support schools' answers to the items on the SAM. The next task for this standard setting project was we used some statistical methodology to set standards for 3 score levels of implementation. So the original SAM from Florida is designed as a rubric, which you'll see, but there was no threshold of score that they had laid out saying if you scored this, then you're actually all the way into implementation. And so we wanted to have levels set up so we could say, okay, this school is doing some good things, but they're not yet fully implementing. Or this school is not implementing yet, but they're on their way to something called initially implementing. So what we did was we set threshold scores based on the standard setting group about what does it take across every item and every domain, all 6 domains, to be not implementing, initially implementing, and fully implementing. So what you'll see when we get into the scoring portion of the SAM is that there's very specific thresholds set up, score thresholds for every one of those 6 domains that will give a level so that we can see, are they not implementing yet, initially, or fully implementing. In addition, those statistical methodology also took into account some items that the panel felt without certain items within the SAM, doesn't matter what everything else is scored, you're not yet initially implementing. So there are some that we call non-negotiables. And with that, just meaning that there are certain items that you must have in place to say that you've moved into the land of MTSS. Okay. Angie, do you want me to stop for just a sec and see if there's any questions at this point?
Yes, let's do that. I also want to point out to those of you who may have joined us a little bit later, is you do have the option of asking questions. If you put your cursor over the screen, the Google toolbar should pop up on the left side of your screen, and you have a column of icons that are going from top to bottom there, and one of them should be a Q&A icon. If you click on that, then you can just pose your questions. We're the only ones who see those, and we verbally respond. I've gotten a few hellos, and it's nice to see too. So please.
Angie, are you there?
I am.
Okay, so I'll go ahead and start again. Is that good?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Okay, so the next piece, and we'll stop again in a minute, is around how is it designed to be used. Okay, so the SAM, the self-assessment of MTSS implementation, can be used in a couple of different ways. So first off, when you look at that PDF document that was sent on the Moodle, it's within the Moodle, and it's also sent with your email reminder of this Google on Air. That PDF document has every item across all 6 domains, and it also has the rubric for how you kind of get to full implementation of each item. In addition to that, and I'll show you that in just a second, it has some endnotes that really help develop that common language and understanding around key topics within MTSS. So as a self-report, a guide, a rubric for school teams to use for implementation, it can be used within that PDF document at any time. So you can give that to your schools if you feel so inclined. We would never say you have to. You can give that to your schools so that they can kind of see, okay, what is this big picture of a multi-tiered system of support? So that does a really nice job of breaking it down into those 6 domains. What does this look like when we're fully implementing? So as a guide, it can be used at any time. The formal administration that we talked about just a minute ago, that's designed to be a facilitated administration as an implementation fidelity measure, okay, is designed to be done one time per year. We ask that that be done between April and June is our window for that. And we'll show you kind of how we have it set up just briefly at the end of this to be scored in an electronic format. So it's important to note when you give it as a self-report, as a guide for implementation, and as a rubric within this PDF that you have access to right now, there's no way to score it in that. And it's not designed to give you scores in that format. The way it's scored has to be put into an Excel sheet that we have set up for you. Okay, so that's the only way you can actually determine scores and levels of implementation. And so we'll provide that to every district. So we ask that when it is administered as a fidelity measure during at least that one time a year in the spring, that first it's given, that PDF document is given to the school team, that school leadership team or school MTSS leadership team that's facilitating implementation. And each member of that team would read the items first and individually think about how they would respond. So ideally that's done before a structured meeting. After they've thought about those items individually, the team comes together with that district facilitator, could be the MTSS coordinator or another member of the district team. They discuss their responses and they reach consensus on each item. There are those endnotes I want to bring attention to because that's going to really help with the administration to make sure everyone understands that language. Then the facilitator can collect supporting evidence if they feel it's necessary. So those suggested supporting evidences are optional, but there may be a time when the facilitator is sitting down with the team to administer the SAM and they've scored themselves optimizing on an item, and you just have questions about perhaps they didn't understand the item or your view of their score may be different than theirs. And during that time, that would be a great time to say, you know, some suggested things that we could show, if you could show me these. The most common would be like a school improvement plan, agendas, meeting minutes. So those are all within the items on that PDF. Okay, then the scores are put into the spreadsheet, which we will show you, which is in an electronic format. And it automatically calculates for each domain, each of those 6 domains, whether the school is not implementing, initially implementing, or fully implementing. There's 3 levels of implementation. Okay. That scores it for you. There's no way to score it within the PDF, FYI, because you have to have some formulas behind it based on the levels and thresholds that we've set up. Okay, and just to note, we do recommend, our recommendation is that a school have at least initially implementing on every domain, all 6 domains, prior to really considering moving towards using an RTI-based approach for SLD eligibility. So we can talk more about that within our coordinators meetings as well, but that's just a little aside. Okay, I'm gonna stop right there before I bring up the PDF and see if there's any questions at all at this point.
Amy?
Yes, ma'am. Oh, let me go ahead and hang on one sec. Let me just mute myself so that we don't get an echo. Before I can mute myself, I have to find Google Hangout again. Just a moment here. Sometimes things escape me. Okay.
Amy, this will be fun because I will give you the question and then I will have to mute so that you can unmute again. So lots of coordination and steps, but we do have a question and they would like for you to repeat the part again about the relationship between the scores on the SAM and SLD eligibility decisions. And so right now, that's the only question that I see, and I'll just give it just another minute so we don't have to mute and unmute back and forth. But So we're going to ask you to repeat the part again about the relationship between the SAM scoring and making decisions regarding SLD eligibility. And it looks like that's the only question right now, Amy, so I'm going to mute again so you can repeat that.
Okay, yeah, great question. Okay, so all that was said about that is remember that each domain has thresholds set up within it that can only be accessed by scoring it in our electronic platform. The Cohort 2 coordinators will receive extensive training on that electronic platform March 1st at their first Cohort 2 coordinators meeting. So I'm going to show you that today, but it won't be too necessary. In order to, once scores are put in to this electronic platform, every domain, all 6 of those domains, leadership, building capacity, each of those gets a level of implementation. Those levels are not implementing, initially implementing, and fully implementing. Our recommendation is that before a school moves towards using an RTI-based approach for identifying learning disabilities, that school be at least initially implementing on each domain, on every domain. Okay? Okay. I'm going to assume that's an okay because Angie's muted. And you can always email your coordinator, your MTSS consultant, and get more information about that. We'll be happy to answer any further questions you have too. Okay, so now, okay, so we make sure that this is up. I'm assuming, and I assume Angie will unmute herself and tell me if you cannot see my screen. But what you should see on your screen right now is the PDF that was sent out to you. It's a 16-page document that has the complete self-assessment of MTSS implementation. This is being released throughout the cohorts, through the cohorts. So cohort 1, where it was introduced to that this school year, cohort 2 is getting introduced to it at the end of this school year. And as we move into cohort 3 and 4, they will also have access, but it is just being introduced through the cohorts right now. Okay, so when we look at the SAM, I'm going to go through and just show you some important highlights as we move on. Since we're going to, with coordinators, we're going to do some extensive work in the electronic platform, how we're going to structure the rest of this section. I'm going to go just briefly into the electronic platform at the end. But what I really want to focus on is how these items are structured within the SAM, and to call your attention to some items that you may need to pay special attention to as district personnel, and some suggestions of how you can kind of get this work done. Okay, so the first page that you'll see on this PDF is just the introduction, a lot of what we just talked about. It is built around those 6 domains. The other piece that I want to show first that you need to be aware of before you even go into the item descriptors that you'll see is all the way at the end, everybody's going to get dizzy, are the endnotes. The endnotes came some from the Florida version of the SAM, and then as a result of the leveling work that we did, the leveling committee that got together, the standard setting project, we also had some items that are implementers across the state, so they may need some more clarification on. So we also developed further endnotes to make sure that it was crystal clear, hopefully. There's still going to be some lack of clarity, but hopefully we can help you with that. Okay, so the endnotes are at the end. They are identified by subscript next to the items they relate to. So I would start as district personnel, I think that's probably the majority of people we have on this today, by reviewing the directions and then going through and making sure you're familiar with the endnotes. Just to make sure if you have questions about the endnotes, an item doesn't make sense to you, that's really kind of a nice place to start just because you get some good common language and understanding around what we're talking about. Okay, so the first page is what it is, when we use it, like we just went through, and then directions for implementation. So as you go into this, if you forget that you're not going to get scores from this PDF, It is bolded right here. In order to receive a score with a level of implementation for each domain, the facilitator is responsible for entering score levels within the NC-SAM Excel scoring protocol. So that Excel scoring protocol is actually put on an electronic platform so that it'll also aggregate to the district level. You can see your scores across the district. That will again be given access to coordinators on March 1st. Okay, so if we start with the first domain of leadership, I'll point out a couple of items, a couple of things that we want you to pay attention to. So when we talk about the SAM, every domain across from leadership on down is structured the same way. So on the far left column, you will see the item and the examples of supporting evidence that could be gathered. Okay, this looks the same in the Excel version as well. Then the full item, so if we look at this first one, the principal is actively involved in and facilitates MTSS implementation. So that's the full item. Then we have a rubric that we score by. So you can see the numbers are not here, but it gives you an idea of the developmental progression of a school that would be implementing this component of MTSS. So it starts with not implementing. So we start with that. What does this not look like? The principal does not actively support MTSS. That's our non-example. And then it goes across emerging or developing, operationalizing, and optimizing. It's important to note that these build on one another. So if we start with the principal is actively involved, the number one item, we see that emerging means the principal communicates an urgent desire to implement MTSS, participates in PD on MTSS, and is establishing an MTSS vision. To get to operationalizing, they have to do this, plus, and the principal actively supports the leadership team and staff to build capacity. To get to optimizing, and the principal actively supports database problem solving use at the school. So in order to be an optimizing school and optimizing on this item, they would need all of these from emerging to optimizing. Okay? So it builds upon each other. Okay. The next piece I wanted to show you was so go a little bit deeper within this leadership domain. So it starts with leadership. There's 39 items, like I said, all together on the SAM. There's not an equal number of items per domain. Okay. So first off is leadership. What I want to point out here, so you can start thinking about this as you introduce this to your schools, is that there's 5 questions within this leadership domain. There's one question, this first one, that centers around just the building principal's role in MTSS. So if you want to start within your structures at your district level, really kind of prepping your principals, a great way is to start with this item here. So within this item, just understanding that the principal needs to be actively involved in a multi-tiered system at their school. They need to understand their job is to establish the vision and continue to communicate that and develop that capacity. So there's one item about the principal. And then 3 items surround that leadership team, okay? So around that leadership team, we have items that talk about what it needs to look like, okay? And then we have items about what their duties are as a leadership team, as far as providing PD and coaching to the staff and facilitating that implementation of MTSS as a part of school improvement planning. So we talk a lot about MTSS being a school improvement framework, but if we're really looking at this SAM as a picture of full implementation, we would fully expect that MTSS is a part of that school improvement planning in the building. Okay? So there's 3 questions around that leadership team. I'm going to point out some really important endnotes in this section as well. And then there's one question around the school having a strategic plan for MTSS implementation. That is, again, aligned with the school improvement plan. Within this leadership domain, I'm going to point out that there's several endnotes that you'll be able to read through, but there's a couple that I really think that deserves a little attention here. First off, when we talk about a leadership team that facilitates So we see it here. The leadership team is actively facilitating implementation. We can look down to the end note of number 6, and I'm not going to scroll down there, but it explains exactly what that means for that leadership team. So when we talk about a leadership team, this could be part of MTSS leadership team, could be part of your school improvement team, or it could be your school improvement team at a school level. But it needs to be directly connected to what the school improvement team is doing if it's not a part of that, or it is that. So within the end notes, this number 6, we can see that it's very clear how they facilitate implementation of MTSS. That leadership team is actively promoting the vision and mission. They're actively communicating the implementation plan to the rest of the school staff. They're in charge of allocating the resources for planning and delivery of instruction across the tiers. And they're making sure that the assessment is aligned with all layers of support. They're providing ongoing coaching and PD to the staff, and they're collecting and analyzing data on how MTSS is going across the school. So how well is our system working? So when you have a leadership team that asks you, what are we supposed to be doing? This one really kind of sums it up quite nicely when you look at that end note number 6 for item number 5. The other end note that's really nice within this section is around PD and coaching. So when we talk about on item number 3, that they're doing ongoing PD and coaching, what are we expecting that leadership team at the school to do? And these are ongoing activities to develop the capacity of staff to implement MTSS. Okay, some of this may be done at a district level as well, but the school team really needs to have a handle on the skills and knowledge and beliefs of the staff so that they can support implementation. And then finally, the other thing on here that we have a lot of questions continually about is that implementation plan. Okay, so we really talk about that implementation plan or that strategic plan in number 4. And what we're talking about is a plan that's looking at ongoing implementation data and ongoing outcome data to develop where do we want our students to be and where do we want our staff to be with MTSS and how are we going to get them there. This doesn't have to be a new plan. Many places will combine this with their school improvement plan. But what we're hoping for is that it's continually engaging the rest of the staff in that implementation, and it's seen not as an extra thing in the school improvement plan, but it's seen as the framework within that school improvement plan. So this is the way that we're getting schools to improve over time, and MTSS as a frame within which everything fits. I'm going to stop, Angie, and I'm going to mute myself for a second.
Hey, Amy. So at this point, we don't have any questions, but I would like to make a comment. Make sure that you are able to access the PDF. If you don't have it in front of you now, I just want to remind you that there's a link to the PDF directly above the embedded video in week 4 on this presentations page, so you can find it there. And that link, quite honestly, is just sending you to the resource folder in week 5 on the Moodle, so it's not requiring you to get out of the course. But I guess what I'm wanting to make sure you understand is that that PDF is on the module, and if you can't find that, please just let us know, and we'll try to direct you there a little bit more specifically. Another thing, Amy, that I wanted to mention is that when we shared this PDF with our members of cohort 1, some of them would take the PDF and go over the leadership component with some of the school leadership of their selected schools, the schools that they had determined that they were going to specifically focus on throughout the Module 1 participation. And I think that's a good idea. I think we would want to make sure that when we share the SAM description using the PDF, that we are not using it to establish readiness, because this is a rubric and it's looking specifically at implementation. So I think that would be important. And I would just remind everyone what Amy said in the onset would be, this is an evaluation. But our cohort 1 participants and our coordinators in particular have found this to be a useful tool when even just trying to describe to schools what we are ultimately looking for. So anyway, I wanted to put that in there. Amy, I think you're doing a great job, and we're getting lots of just wonderful positive affirmation from our friends who are listening. And I'm going to mute now so you can continue.
Great. Okay. I love talking to cohort 2. Y'all are awesome. Okay. So let me go back. Okay. So those were the key elements in the leadership domain, that first domain. So now hold on to your hats, because we're going on to building the capacity or infrastructure for implementation. So notice we haven't said anything about tier 1, tier 2, or tier 3, because we all know that, as in the words of the esteemed Corey Watkins, you have to build the foundation of the house before you start building the house. And so these components have to be in place to make sure that we have that infrastructure. So the building the capacity and infrastructure for implementation is actually the longest of the 6 domains. It's 11 items. And many of these items in this domain really center around, again, the duties of that leadership team at the school level to set up a multi-tiered system of support that supports all the adults in the building to do this work. So I hope you've heard us say by now that nothing within MTSS should fall on the backs of one individual. It's all about a team approach, and it's all about setting up systems to make life easier, not harder. Okay, so the first thing within the building the capacity and infrastructure for implementation is that we talk about the staff having those critical elements defined. Okay, when we talk about what are those critical elements of MTSS, we can refer to the end note that's associated with that. I will call attention to the end note associated with that is actually on a previous item, but you can go down within the end notes. And when we talk about those critical elements, they include the standards. So not just the North Carolina Standard Course of Study for academics, but do we have defined the behavioral expectations we want to see across our building? The next piece, that the element that should be defined within your multi-tiered system of support and communicated and understood by school staff, is what assessment data we're going to be using to make decisions. The next piece is, how do our multiple tiers of instruction and intervention look? So we should have those tiers defined. And gone are the days when every time a student has a struggle or a group of students have a struggle, we have to come up with a unique intervention outside of within a team that's problem solving every single unique situation. We want to have a defined system of support, which meaning a system of interventions for students who need those to quickly receive those. The next critical element we talk about is database problem solving. So we need to be able to define what is the database problem solving model that we're going to be using. Okay, so if we go deeper into this building the capacity, 4 items within here really talk about the PD and coaching that's used to support implementation. 4 items talk about scheduling practices. 1 item will talk about problem-solving procedures. These include data decision rules. And then 1 item will talk about resource allocation. So this group of items really talks about the structures that we need in place to make sure that we're helping all adults in our building understand and deliver an effective multi-tiered system of support. So within this domain, I want to point out that it's important that we talk about, there's a lot of things in this domain that could really be installed at a district level first and filtered down to the school level. So it depends on what your district is like and where you are. But what we found within cohort 1 is that presenting this domain to a district leadership team really allows them to see these are the foundational pieces. This is the infrastructure that we need within our schools to make this work happen and make it happen well. So our suggestion is to take this domain at least and really start diving into it with your leadership teams at your schools or at your district to see, are there elements within this, instructional frameworks, those critical elements, the assessment systems we use, the PD and coaching we're providing to staff, the data sources, the problem-solving model. Can we kind of make these district-wide so that we can then support them more effectively rather than saying each school is defining their own within these systems? Okay? So although this tool is meant to assess and guide school-level implementation, this domain is really geared towards also looking to see what is it as a district we can support to make this work easier for schools. Alrighty, so that is building the capacity. You'll be able to read through these and please ask questions as you have them. The next one is communication.
Amy.
Yes. Whew, scared me. Hang on.
I'm sorry to scare you. I do want to make sure before you go on to the next section that we point out, and I think you did a very good job of pointing out that that section in particular tends to be one of the more difficult sections. Not only does it, I think, have the most items, but some of the descriptions, I think, require some thought, and I think you brought that out nicely. So that would be one. If I'm looking at this instrument and I'm trying to become more familiar with it, I'd probably spend a little bit more time there. And the capacity building does seem like those items are sort of wrapping their arms around many of the other components that we're looking at on that instrument. So well done there. We do have a comment where we're just needing to make sure we have some clarification. So it is correct that the recommendations is ultimately we have the schools review the PDF and the rubric so that when it is time to conduct the actual self-assessment, they'll be familiar with the tool, the domains, and the items underneath each domain so that the meeting can go a little bit more fluidly and folks can come to consensus on where they feel like they are in terms of the implementation at that point. So Doug, thank you for contributing that comment. And I think that's it right now. I don't see any other questions. So Amy, I'm going to mute so you can unmute.
Thanks. Yes, that's awesome. Yeah, so they would review it first. What we've heard from Wake County, who did pilot this, was that if the team members at the school level are reviewing it before the district personnel come out to facilitate that administration, it should take about an hour to complete. So in a good expedited meeting, everybody knows there's not meetings that always take place that way, but if we're kind of have a plan in place before we walk in, it should take about an hour. Okay, so let me put this back up. So the next domain, which is the shortest, is communication and collaboration. So there's just a couple of things I want to point out in this section. There are some good endnotes that I want to draw your attention to that you'll want to review. But just to let you know, communication and collaboration, there's just 4 items. 2 items, they're very important though. 2 items talk about the communication feedback loop. So not just one-way communication, but 2-way, so that it's coming back from staff. We're communicating to all the staff at a school and getting information back from them to adjust our practice. So there's 2 items around the communication feedback loop for school staff. These really talk about we need to ensure consensus and engagement from our staff across the school. And then the next piece is that as that consensus and engagement in an MTSS is established, we need to have ongoing data sharing. And that's data sharing not just of student outcome data, because we're good at that, but implementation data as well. So how are we doing as the adults in the building with implementing MTSS and all those components within MTSS? Then within this domain, there's also 2 items that are regarding family and community engagement. So an important part of a multi-tiered system of support and what we believe is that the student doesn't exist in isolation, but they exist within this entire system that includes their family, their friends, their community partners, and their school family. Okay. The next one, moving right along, is database problem solving. So there's likely that this some of the items in here will be somewhat familiar to folks who have been implementing some type of problem solving in their district previously. There are 7 items within this one. First, I'll point out that the very first item really talks about integrated database problem solving. So when we talk about integrated database problem solving, we're really shifting our thinking from the old way of RTI and PBIS separate to, or academic and behavior supports separate, to integrating data together so that we can problem solve most effectively. So we're doing integrated academic, behavior, and social emotional problem solving. So the goal overall on that first item would be that we're doing it across all grade levels, all tiers, and all content areas is the ultimate goal. But as you can see, this does kind of move you along in a progression on that very first item in this domain, so that as you're moving, when we talk to you within the Moodle, we want you to start smaller. And so even schools and districts that are not fully implementing yet can still receive some credit for being able to say, okay, right now we're doing a really nice job across our Tier 1 literacy or our Tier 1 behavior, but we haven't quite delved into problem solving across math. So that's how this item is set up. There's also one item for each of the 4 steps in the problem solving model. So the problem solving model we're going to be presenting to you in the Moodle is just a basic 4-step model. We're not saying you have to use that. If you have another model you're using, great. But every model needs to have at least these 4 steps. So there's an item for each of those 4 steps within this domain. So one talking about the gap, talking about problem identification, problem analysis, plan implementation, and plan evaluation. And then finally, the last item in this section is about making sure that we're also problem solving not just the student outcome data, but we're problem solving our ongoing implementation of MTSS. So another component of this, our duty of the school leadership team, is to continually look at our implementation. And is our implementation of MTSS working? So the last piece on this domain is talking about, are we problem solving the resource allocation and other barriers to implementation to make sure this is smooth for our school staff? Okay, getting there. 3-tiered instruction and intervention model is the next domain. How this is broken down is really pretty simple. We talk about this one, there's 6 items. Overall, this is talking about, do you have a defined system in your school? So we do expect that folks are defining what does Tier 1 look like in our school for academics and for behavior, social emotional skills. What does Tier 2 look like in our school? Sometimes these are defined at the district level, which is fine. We just want to make sure that at the school level, again, folks know what it is, know what our instructional frameworks and systems of support are. So this item is broken down by Tier 1. There's an item for academic practices and behavior practices. Tier 2 are supplemental. There's an item for academic practices and behavior and social emotional practices. And Tier 3, there's an item for academic and behavior and social emotional practices. Okay, and data evaluation. So the last component, but certainly not the least important at all, is data evaluation. Data evaluation, this domain has 6 items. And this is really asking, do we have the data and the supports to use the data to make good decisions about our system? And that data is not just student data, but it's also adult data. Okay, and when I say adult data, I don't mean EVAS data about how effective a teacher is on standardized tests. When we say adult data, we mean, do we have data to say, if we ask that folks are implementing this instructional strategy and we expect that to have results for our students, are we looking to see if that instructional strategy is actually being implemented? So that's an adult data. So as we look at this component, this domain of data evaluation, that's what it's looking at, is what outcome data we have and what implementation data we have and how we're using that. So there's one item that really sums up, this very first one, how we look at student outcome data in a multi-tiered system of support. And you'll see this within our data evaluation section on the Moodle. We've stopped talking about it in terms of formative and summative assessment. We're not putting it in those buckets any longer. What we're really just talking about is having data sources that fulfill certain purposes. So identifying who's at risk, why they're at risk, monitoring their progress, informing instruction, and determining if they met outcomes. So when we talk about student outcome data, that's really the big picture there. There's also within this domain 3 items talking about the policies and procedures for using the data tools. And this is really talking about making sure that we're collecting consistent data, because we can't make good decisions if the data is not pure. And then there's one item regarding data sources used to evaluate our implementation. Again, are we looking to see how we're doing as adults? And then there's one item that looks at the use of the data to allocate resources. Okay. So that is the SAM. Here's the endnotes at the end. We don't look for endnotes. There are 31 of them. The next piece I wanted to do, we have about 10 minutes left, is just show you how it would look when a coordinator or another district personnel puts those scores in for electronic scoring. Angie, is there anything I need to pay attention to before I do that?
No, I think we're right on track.
Okay. Just a moment. Let me open up the correct window. Okay, or not. I had the correct window open and it was no longer open. Talk amongst yourselves. Okay, so when a district level personnel administers the SAM, facilitated administration, as an implementation fidelity measure, they would administer that with the school, looking for those evidences, and then they would put it, as they're going through, within this electronic spreadsheet. So this is the way the scores will actually come in. So if they put in what the school's name is, facilitator, team members on the cover sheet, and the date, it'll feed into other places as well, so you can have a handy kind of report available too. Again, this is all going to be gone in through detail, given to coordinators with great detail, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time here. But if we go into, say, the building, you can see across the bottom here, we have different components. So if we go into the building, the capacity domain, here's the items, just like we saw it on the PDF, the rubric, and then a score. So the scores range from 0, 1, 2, 3. We put those scores in. It only will allow you to type into these peach boxes. The coordinator, if they wish, can also put in evidences in these places. We'll go through this component. It'll only allow you to put in a 0, 1, 2, or 3. If I try to put in a 4, it's going to stop me, as you can see. And now, what pops up based on a formula is that this school, on the component of building the capacity and infrastructure for implementation, is at a level of not implementing at this point. They didn't meet the threshold that was set by those standard setting committees. And they also didn't have all the non-negotiables. As I put in some more scores, their level changes to initially implementing. And then it also calculates for you the percent of implementation. This happens for each one of those domains. They each have a separate sheet. We do the same. And then it all goes into, at the school level, a summary sheet. So you can see for each of the critical components for that school, you can see their level of implementation based on those thresholds and their percentage of implementation. And then you receive a graph for them. In addition, you can print out what we call our summary by item. So this is just a summary sheet. Goes through just the item, gives the score. It automatically feeds in here, so you don't have to do anything else. And this is a nice thing to give a school team. Say this is how you're performing now. This is where you guys are. Gives the level of implementation for each domain and the percent of implementation here. And then the last piece, the other way you can also give back the data to the schools, is there's a summary by descriptor that automatically feeds in. So all of the items that were emerging automatically come into this column. The items that we're operationalizing automatically go in this column, and the items that we're optimizing automatically go in this column. Since I didn't put in all the scores, you can see there's a lot of not implementing because it's reading it as 0. What the district folk will also be able to see then, so they have one of these for each of their schools. This is just a practice folder. They have one of these for each of their schools. And as they put those scores in for each school, they can look at a district sheet that automatically computes the scores for them. So this would have across here, you can see it just came in. Since we had school one that we did at 72.3%, 0.73% for this component, all the schools would feed in here in one sheet that shows you across the district, how are we performing, and then it averages your district average for all critical components, and then it feeds into a chart for your district level, so you can see where your implementation is at a district level. And then you can use this plan of action at a district level as well, if you choose to. It allows you to see your district average score, get a goal, set a goal for implementation, decide if you have individual schools you want to work with or the entire district on that component. You can name the schools and record your PD and coaching plan as well. Or you can use this as just a different template for action planning at the district level. So all of those things are automatically coming in. All of the scores will automatically come in for your use at the district level from all the schools that you implement the SAM with and put your scores into the spreadsheets. That's a very short rundown, and we'll be doing more of this with the coordinators, but I just wanted to open that up. And I think, and just to be completely transparent, that these are shared so that we can also assist you with implementation. They are shared with just our MTSS team at the state level. And then so hopefully we can also see how schools are progressing and be able to refine our supports for implementation across the state to make sure we're supporting folks appropriately, and to see if our efforts at implementation are making a difference for kids across the state. So we want to continually evaluate our performance as a state MTSS team as well. That is
Amy. I think we might have lost Amy, but it's time.
I'm here. I'm here.
Okay, I think you've muted then. All right, well, thank you guys for joining us today, and we hope that this has been helpful. If you have additional questions regarding SAM, its purpose, how we're going to ultimately use it, and how it's going to help you and your school systems, please contact your district MTSS consultant. I will be more than happy to talk to you about it. I hope that the information on SAM during week 1 was helpful, and certainly don't hesitate to go back up there if you want some more written support to use as you begin talking about SAM with your selected schools. And certainly, again, please don't hesitate to reach out to us if you have any other questions. We appreciate everything that's been put into this instrument so that we can take it and use the results in pretty extensive ways. It's very exciting once we see what it is that we're going to be able to get from the feedback regarding the implementation at the school level. So again, thank you for spending your lunch hour with us, and we hope to see you again on April 12th, which is our next scheduled Google Hangout. Have a good afternoon. Thank you, Amy.